First story. The mysterious incident, the Russo-Japanese War. War, the most terrifying and dangerous time, where sometimes only a miracle beyond comprehension, or even in the astral realm, can help one survive. One such astounding incident occurred at the onset of the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and was vividly recounted by journalist Leo Gournung in the renowned almanac Wonders, Mysteries, Discoveries. The bizarre vision of the soldier's wife. While lounging on the couch across from the mirror, a young bride recently wed to a soldier who was called to duty just days after their wedding, had a strange vision. In the reflection, she discerned two vague figures in white, sneaking through the snow. Gradually, the outlines became clearer, and in these figures, she recognized her beloved with another man. Then, the woman saw another pair of silhouettes, armed with long daggers, moving much faster, constantly glancing around. The strangers with knives were Asians, and one of them, stealthily approaching her husband from behind, aimed to deliver a fatal blow. Terrified, the woman screamed loudly, grabbed the first item she found on the floor, and hurled it at the mirror. A crash ensued, and she collapsed unconscious. Afterward, the woman detailed this extraordinary incident to her father-in-law, who documented it in a notebook. Several weeks later, the husband unexpectedly returned from the war, sharing an astonishing story. It turned out that he and his comrade were sent on a perilous reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. Cloaked in white camouflage, they crawled through the snow when suddenly they heard a hysterical female scream and the loud sound of shattered glass. Before their eyes, a scene unfolded. Two dead Japanese men with large knives in their hands lay on the snow. How and who killed the Asians remained unclear, as there was no one else around. Listening to the tale, the father showed his son the notebook with a detailed description of the vision, which precisely matched the recounted story. The family was shaken, all except the young governess, who was deeply interested in yoga, the astral, and the mysteries of human consciousness. She explained that the mistress had simply killed the astral bodies of the Japanese enemies through a mirror at a distance. Second story. The Resurrected. Let me tell you about something that happened way back in 1985. In our neighborhood lived an elderly couple, Granny Meisha and her man Vitya. Out of their two sons, who went off to war, only one made it back, and the way it happened was downright unbelievable. The oldest son, Seryoja, shipped out to Afghanistan in 1982. Just a few months shy of his demobilization, his squad got surrounded by rebels, and they gunned down everyone. 2 years later, the younger son, Yevgeny, went off to the same war. Within a year, the parents received a funeral notice adorned with an order for their second son. Tears flowed like a river, and we all did our best to console the grieving parents. The 9th day after the death of their second son rolled around. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed at the door. Imagine the shock when the deceased Yevgeny appeared on the doorstep. The mother had to call an ambulance. After things settled down, Yevgeny told his story. We had orders to go around a mountain pass to get behind enemy lines. Everything went almost perfectly. The sweep was successful, but I remember the commander yelling, "Get down!" After those words and a burst of machine gunfire, I felt a pain in my chest. Later, I woke up, but I couldn't figure out where. Birds were singing. The sun was shining, and everything felt like a sweet dream. What was all this? We were just in the thick of it in the mountains, and now it's a clearing, grass and bushes. Suddenly, I felt a touch. It was my late brother, Seriosha. He asked me why I was lying on the wet ground, and then invited me to follow him to a bench. I asked him where we were, and he said, "You'll find out." He offered me a pack of cigarettes. Lit up, and so did I. I asked about the thing I feared the most. "Are we dead?" "Why would we be? Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, how's Mom? Dad?" We talked, and I forgot that he had been gone for so long. After our conversation, my brother told me to go back home and advised me to open my eyes. When I came to, they were laying me in a coffin. I jumped up and screamed. Everyone freaked out, called an ambulance, and rushed me to the air. Later, the doctor told me, "You lucked out, kid. Real lucky." Third story, the notification. It was already pitch dark, but Vika didn't turn on the lights. She sat quietly at the table, tears streaming down her face, covering it with her hands. Her shoulders trembled. Hurtful words from her mother lingered in her mind, even though the young woman knew deep down that her mother was probably right. It all started about a year ago, when her husband, an officer, was sent to Afghanistan to offer a helping hand to our fraternal people, as he put it. But this so-called assistance turned out to be a disaster. Countless soldiers returned disabled or in coffins. But what could Vika do? Her desire for her husband not to go there meant nothing. She and Igor had been married for 3 years, living in harmony, loving each other, with plans to have a child. But now, that idea was temporarily put on hold until her husband's return. Igor left, and for Vika, the days and nights of waiting dragged on. Anyone who has waited for a husband or fiancé from war would understand the young woman who, dropping everything, ran out the gate whenever she saw the mailman through the window. Most of the time, in vain, her husband wrote infrequently, probably not having much time. To some, her husband's letters might seem dry, but not to Vika. She felt how much he missed her. She even prayed to the icon of the Mother of God, inherited from her grandmother, for her husband to come back home alive. One night, Vika had a dream. She stood on the bank of some river, and her husband on the opposite shore was trying to wade through the river, but he just couldn't reach the shore where Vika was. She, in turn, couldn't enter the water, no matter how hard she tried, as if someone was holding her back. The dream scared her a bit, although she dismissed it. Who cares what dreams come? All due to nerves. And 3 days later, the young woman received a notification that her husband, Captain Vasiliev, IA, while fulfilling an international duty in the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, went missing. Vika felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her. Oddly, she could cry over some nonsense before, but now she couldn't shed a tear, as if she had turned to stone. Mechanically, she had breakfast in the morning, mechanically went to work, and mechanically came back home. She found a bit of solace at work. In the kindergarten, she loved her pupils very much. But at home, sorrow overwhelmed her again, and Vika spent more time at her mother's place. But now they had quarreled, although it was heading that way for a while. About 6 months after receiving the notification, her mother started talking about life moving forward, that Vika was still very young. "Mom, where are you heading with this?" The daughter became wary. Although she understood what was being implied, Vika was an attractive woman, and men quite often showed her attention. But she didn't notice them. Why would she? She had a husband. "I understand everything, Vika, but it's been 6 months already. Grieving happened. You need to live on." "Mom, I don't need anyone. I have a husband, the daughter said firmly. Of course, her husband could be dead, but Vika knew for sure. Ego was alive. If something happened to him, she would feel it instantly. And if he's alive, he will come back to her. They exchanged harsh words, and Vika ran to her room. After crying, she went to a local fortune teller, Granny Matrena. Granny Matrena externally resembled Baba Yaga from fairy tales. But unlike her, the old woman was kind. No one knew how old she was, or if she had any relatives. Matrena settled in their village after the war, came from somewhere, and stayed. Locals often sought her advice. The old woman could heal with herbs and predict the future. Matrena greeted her warmly, even served her tea. Pouring her herbal tea, the hostess said, "Don't hold a grudge against your mother. She cares about you, wishes you well. But what's good is different for everyone. Your dream was a sign. Your husband was sending you a message that he's alive." After tea, Granny Matrena spread her old cards on the round dining table, looked at them, and said, "Your husband is alive. Don't listen to anyone." "I see. He was wounded, but is alive and well now. So, don't cry. Wait for your husband." After tea, Vika left her house, encouraged by the words of the hostess. But at home, the urge to cry returned. She cried the evening and night away. Still, she firmly decided to wait for her husband. She felt her dream was true, and Granny Matrena, as far she knew, never erred in her predictions. Igor returned a month after Granny Matrena read Vika's fortune. He just walked into their home. Seeing him, Vika dropped her cup on the floor and nearly fainted. Her husband rushed to her, and they stood there for a long time, silently embracing. Here, words were unnecessary. Later, her husband told her that he had been seriously wounded, taken captive by the Mujahideen, and a few months later, the camp where the prisoners were held was liberated by Soviet forces. Vika told her husband about her dream, and he asked if she remembered the day it happened. "How could I forget?" she sighed, laying her head on his shoulder. February 5, 1983, I'll remember it for life. That day, there was a battle where I got wounded and taken captive. Her husband sighed. "I guess that's why, in your dream, I was trying to reach you, but just couldn't."